Chapter 2161. He paused for a moment. There won't be any more in the future. Gume has gone abroad, and those little celebrities are no longer interesting. So I'm fine with it. Chinmu closed her eyes. I don't think you're interesting either. Tell me, who's interesting? He kissed the corner of her mouth and couldn't help kissing her again. Chinmu didn't resist. She let him kiss her, knowing that she couldn't escape. After a long time, when he was satisfied and left, she chuckled. Will you kill him? You can try. Zhou Chengwang bit her lips and said, Mumu, be good. I like it when you're good. Chinmu looked down. Didn't you say that you wanted to talk about something? Tell me. Zhou Chengwang's eyes flickered. The seduction had failed. She was no longer the little girl who blushed and couldn't help herself from kissing him. She had been very proactive during their first time. On the wedding night, he was drunk, but he knew that she had kissed him in her pajamas. That night, he had possessed her with a hint of resentment, not gently. On the wedding night, she had cried a lot, and only he knew how hypocritical his consolation had been. Now, he had spent a lot of effort to seduce her, but she wasn't moved. Her reaction was just a normal physiological reaction of a woman. As a man, he knew it very well. Zhou Chengwang was a little disappointed, but he quickly adjusted himself and smiled. I've invested in a reality show. The theme is to invite some business tycoons to participate and bring their wives. I think the ratings will be very high. Chinmu's eyes widened. Zhou Chengwang, you're not thinking of asking me to participate with you, are you? I'll invite Yi Muyun to participate as well. He might bring Song Karen, but Zhao Yin doesn't have a girlfriend. Tang Sher will be his best choice. There won't be any scandals, and she's eye-catching enough. Zhou Chengwang looked at her and said, Of course, you can disagree, but I won't invite the people before me. In the end, I'll invite some celebrities. Chinmu looked at him warily. What are you up to? Do you think I'm that bad? He smiled. I'm just a man who wants to repair his relationship with his wife. She paused for a moment and said, Or do you think your smart brother will be fooled by me? Zhou Chengwang said frankly, Although Glory is doing well now, it's not even a third of boys. I can't even sleep well if your brother stomps his feet. Why would I ask for trouble? Chinmu still pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Take your time to think about it. I'll wait for your reply. He smiled and pinched her little face. Are you still staying at Wenhua Hotel? Mumu, you can move back. I'll stay there. Chinmu's face tensed up, and he didn't seem to appreciate the gesture. No need. How is it convenient to stay in a hotel? He looked at her and said, Besides, I'll feel sorry for you. Chinmu said coldly, Zhou Chengwang, don't be a hypocrite. I'm not a little girl anymore. Yes, you've been Mrs. Zhou for a long time. I knew that on our wedding night. He deliberately provoked her. Chinmu was naturally angry because he had lied to her before. When she was 14 years old, he said that they slept together, which meant that they had sex. But on their wedding night, she was in so much pain. What did that mean? Chapter 2162. Zhou Chengwang was well aware of Chinmu's hateful expression. No matter how much she had changed, she was still as perceptive as a young girl when it came to relationships. Chinmu glared at him. Zhou Chengwang, you don't have to mention your despicable past anymore. It will only make me hate you more. Really? When I kissed you just now, you didn't say that. He chuckled and reached out to touch her little face. As for Chinmu, he awkwardly turned his head to the side. At this moment, her hair was slightly messy. A strand of hair was scattered over her shoulder, making her look a little mischievous. Zhou Chengwang brushed it aside for her. His eyes fell on the side of her face, and his heart palpitated. He had always known about his wife's beauty, but he had never appreciated it like this. Her beauty was tranquil and comfortable. Send me back to the hotel. Chinmu suddenly turned her head and looked right into his deep eyes. At that moment, Zhou Chengwang was a little embarrassed, but after being in the business world for so many years, he was used to hiding himself. He just smiled faintly and started the car. In just a short while, he sent her to Wenhua Hotel. The car stopped, but he did not let her get out immediately. Instead, he grabbed her hand and said calmly, You said it. Think about it. Chinmu's lips moved, but she did not say anything in the end. Zhou Chengwang let her get out of the car. He lit a cigarette and chuckled as he looked at Qin Mu, who was about to escape. Qin Mu ran back to her suite and closed the door. Her chest was still heaving up and down. Zhou Chengwang's offer was indeed very tempting to her. Her biggest wish now was for her brother to be with Cher again. If it were not for her, Cher would not have sacrificed herself. Later on, she secretly went to the U.S. to look for Cher, but she could not find her. She knew that her brother was also searching until he gave up all hope. She even knew of Song Karen's existence, but it was probably her brother's self-deception. On one hand, he convinced himself that he had already forgotten Cher. On the other hand, he felt that if he had a girlfriend, Cher would probably dare to come back. Qin Mu held her cell phone for a long time before she picked it up and dialed Zhou Chengwang's number. Her voice was repressed and restrained. Zhou Chengwang, I agree, but I have a condition. Before she could finish, she heard Zhou Chengwang's voice with one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding the phone. He chuckled. I'm not allowed to touch you, am I? Qin Mu's silence proved that he had guessed correctly. Zhou Chengwang paused for a moment before he said slowly, Don't worry, I won't touch you unless you want me to, okay? Qin Mu was annoyed. Zhou Chengwang, you're really shameless. He laughed calmly and said, Really? You used to say that I was the sunshine of your life. Have you changed so quickly? Qin Mu was silent for a while before she said calmly, Zhou Chengwang, it's not that fast. 8 years is enough to change everything. This time, Zhou Chengwang could not laugh anymore. After hanging up, Qin Mu stared at her cell phone in a daze. She did not know how Zhou Chengwang would invite her brother. From what she knew, her brother still deeply hated Zhou Chengwang. Also, why would Cher participate in a show that Zhou Chengwang invested in? Chapter 2163. However, there was a small hiccup in the middle. Song Karen and Lin Shui came over as well. They were each accompanied by a B-list male celebrity. Qin Mu didn't mind it too much. She was disappointed in Zhou Chengwang anyway. She didn't have a problem with him doing whatever he wanted with Lin Shui. Lin Shui, on the other hand, felt a little guilty when she saw Qin Mu. She didn't dare to act rashly when she looked at Zhou Chengwang. It's time for you to change your team members. Qin Mu's tone was mocking. Zhou Chengwang glared at the producer. What kind of work was this? The producer was also stunned. He was completely out of it. However, since they were already here and there were so many reporters today, it was impossible to change it. No matter what, they had to take care of their reputation. Zhao Yin and Shui Er had always been together. Zhao Yin's gaze landed on Yi Muyun. He saw that Yi Muyun's gaze was like a little wolf dog staring at Shui Er. He sighed inwardly. These two clearly have something going on, but they're not together. He had always disdained these kind of shows. This time, he was doing it for Cher's happiness. He said in a low voice, Song Karen came with someone else. It seems that she and Yi Muyun aren't as close as we thought. Cher glanced at him and snorted. That has nothing to do with me. That day, the hickey on Song Karen's neck was huge. How was it possible that they weren't intimate? She hadn't seen Yi Muyun since that day. She was going to return to America immediately, but Zhao Yin asked her to take part in a show. She didn't expect to meet Yi Muyun. At that moment, she could feel two burning gazes on her. She couldn't ignore them. Hearing her say that, Zhao Yin smiled and didn't say anything. When reporters interviewed him and asked him about his relationship with Cher, Zhao Yin hugged Cher and said generously to the camera, "And is the girl I care about the most." As he said that, he leaned over and kissed her forehead. He also felt that Yi Muyun's gaze couldn't wait to kill him. After the kiss, the scene of him kissing Cher became a trending topic. Who was ANN? Ranked first. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhao Yin with a hint of jealousy. Yes, it was jealousy. If not for the fact that he was Cher's little uncle, he would have rushed up and punched Zhao Yin in the face. On the other side, Zhou Chengwang chuckled and whispered, "Look, aren't you envious that your Prince Charming is kissing someone else?" Qin Mu's gaze was indifferent. "Zhou Chengwang, you really know me well." She smiled and said, "But I seem to remember that Cher is your goddess. You don't feel uncomfortable, do you?" Although Zhou Chengwang had wanted to provoke her, he didn't expect to be ridiculed by her instead. At that moment, he felt a little uncomfortable. Their eyes met and happened to meet Gu Zhe's dark eyes. Gu Zhe didn't come because of him. It was Yi Muyun's request. Zhou Chengwang couldn't help but complain. What a pervert. Two grown men coming to participate in a reality show like this. However, this was also a big attraction. The Fujoshi in front of the TV would definitely like it. He looked at Gu Zhe with a meaningful gaze because he could tell that Gu Zhe liked Qin Mu. He would never have a good impression of a man who liked his wife. However, Gu Zhe was Gu Mei's brother. Chapter 2164. The production crew rented a bus and prepared to head to Dali, Yunnan. Before they left, they took away all the cash and cards they had on them. The production crew gave out some cash regularly. Including the staff, the bus was full. To the men and women who went in and out of the luxury car all day long, it was especially crowded and uncomfortable. Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun were inseparable, sitting together. In front of them were Cher and Zhao Yan, while beside them were Song Karen and a male celebrity. Zhou Chengwang and Qin Mu sat at the back. Moreover, Zhou Chengwang sent that stupid woman, Lin Shui, to the front. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. He looked at the calm Qin Mu and smiled. You don't seem nervous. I remember telling you that every crew has a suite every night. Qin Mu was still unmoved. Didn't Zhou Zong find a woman to warm his bed? I don't have the habit of going out at night. His voice also became indifferent. Moreover, I want to be a good man now. Qin Mu ignored him. Zhou Chengwang didn't say anything either. The relationship between the husband and wife wasn't very harmonious. The drive from B City to Dali was a full 20 hours. They didn't find a place to rest in between and slept in the bus at night. This was a huge torture for everyone. The production crew explained that this was the first test. They wanted to see if the male partner could coax and take care of the female partner. Gu Zhe looked at Yi Muyun and coughed lightly. Am I coaxing you, or are you coaxing me? Yi Muyun pursed his lips and glared at him. Gu Zhe touched his nose. All right. The bus continued to drive. Outside the window, it gradually became dark. Everyone only ate some bread and then went to sleep. This show is too inhumane. They don't even allow us to use our phones. Zhou Chengwang's former mistress, Lin Shui, complained. However, no one said anything after she said that. She was a little bored and didn't say anything else. Lin Shui was not an idiot. When she saw Tang Cher, she knew that she had become a substitute. So, Zhou Zong liked the ANN. So this reality show was organized for the ANN? Lin Shui was full of herself. In her heart, she was determined to beat ANN. Since he couldn't compete in face, he would compete in figure. With this thought in mind, Lin Shui pulled down her collar. However, she immediately felt that it was very cold, so she quickly pulled it up again. The car was quiet. The lights outside were bright, but the interior of the car was dim and flickering. It was especially quiet. Since they were sleeping in a sitting position, no one was comfortable. Cher tried to adjust her position countless times, but it was still uncomfortable, especially her head. She felt uncomfortable no matter where she placed it. In the end, she gave up and leaned against the window. Yi Muyun watched her quietly from behind. His heart was filled with tenderness. Being close to her like this had been his dream for the past 8 years. Although he was still angry at her, he didn't want to think too much about it now. She was so close to him and within his reach. He kept staring at her. Naturally, he could tell that she was uncomfortable. His eyes were filled with heartache. She had been spoiled by him since she was young. How could she suffer like this? Therefore, he leaned over and adjusted her back by 30 degrees so that she could lie down and sleep. However, he would be very uncomfortable if she did that. Chapter 2165. How could Gu Zhe not see that Yi Muyun did this? Because he felt sorry for Zhao Yan, and also because he was afraid that Zhao Yan would lend his shoulder to Cher. How could Mr. Yi, who is always jealous, stand that kind of intimacy? His tone was full of ridicule. How could Yi Muyun not hear it? In the dark car, his voice was very light. Gu Zhe, if you want, come closer. Gu Zhe's expression was a little thought-provoking. A man who had been forbidden for too long was indeed abnormal. He pulled his clothes and coughed. We are in the same room, but not in the same bed. Yi Muyun only glanced at him and didn't say anything. And their heavy conversation was heard by all the people in the car. Those who didn't know better would really think that they were a couple. Cher sat in front of Yi Muyun. She should be lying down now. She could see him a little if she slightly lifted her eyelids. He helped her put down the seat, so she was much more comfortable lying down. But she also knew that he wouldn't be too comfortable. With a height of 184 meters, it must be very hard for him to bend his long legs in such a narrow place. She originally wanted to shake her head, but Zhao Yan secretly held her hand and smiled. Cher tilted her face and looked at Zhao Yan with a puzzled look. Then, Zhao Yan did something inhumane. He also put down the seat and forced Guzé to have nowhere to put his legs. After putting it down flat, he and Cher lay down together, and then they held hands and fell asleep. This simply stunned everyone. Yi Muyun's face was about to darken. Guzé let out a long sigh. "You killed me." Yi Muyun's voice was cold. "You wanted to come." He couldn't be clearer why Guzé wanted to come. It was because of his baby sister, Qin Mu. Qin Mu and Zhou Chengwang came together, but it could be seen that they were still in discord. She was probably willing to come because he wanted to reconcile with Cher. Zhou Chengwang's current thoughts. Yi Muyun found that Zhou Chengwang looked at Qin Mu in a different way. It wasn't hot, but it was the way a man looked at a woman. In the past, he looked at Qin Mu at most as a child. After all, when Qin Mu followed him, she was only 14 years old. What kind of love could there be? Yi Muyun had something on his mind, and he was really uncomfortable, so he couldn't sleep for the whole night. Guzé was the same. The two men each had their own thoughts. There were so many people in the car, but they were the only ones with their eyes open. There were so many people in the car, and they were the only ones who had their eyes open. Yi Muyun, the last row was empty. Zhou Chengwang was selfish, and he and Qin Mu occupied 6 seats. Qin Mu was restrained at first, and she was only willing to sleep sitting, but she had never suffered like this before. After 12 o'clock, she curled up on 2 seats and slept lightly. The night was cold, and even with a thin blanket over her, she was still shivering from the cold. Zhou Chengwang sat over and placed half of her body in his embrace. Qin Mu was still in a daze and didn't reject him. In the end, she hugged his waist and slept for the whole night. Zhou Chengwang didn't dare to move, because if he moved, she wouldn't feel safe. Really, since he was at his lowest, he had never tolerated a girl like this, nor had he been so good to anyone. He always thought that women could be bought with money. Chapter 2166. However, he couldn't buy Qin Mu, so he could only put in some effort. Wasn't she lying obediently in his arms now? At 2 o'clock in the morning, the chauffeur drove the car to the rest stop. He needed to go to the toilet and drink some water. There would be a short 10-minute break. Guzé and Yi Muyun looked at each other and decided to get out of the car to relax. Just as he got up, Guzé's gaze fell on the last row. He saw Qin Mu hugging Zhou Chengwang and sleeping peacefully in his arms. Zhou Chengwang lowered his eyes and looked at his wife quietly. If he hadn't known about their past, Guzé would have thought that they were a loving couple. He looked at them and felt bitter. He stopped looking at them and got out of the car with Yi Muyun. The two of them each had a cigarette and lit it in the late autumn night. The scarlet-red dots rose and fell. Yi Muyun smiled. "Why did you come here?" They had been observing Zhou Chengwang's methods for the past few years, so it wasn't like they didn't know about it. Most of them walked some crooked paths, but they were really useful. For example, when it came to dealing with women, Zhou Chengwang was more of a jerk than any of them. However, after playing outside for a while, he used some tricks to make Qin Mu come out with him obediently. At the same time, Zhou Chengwang gave Yi Muyun, the biggest opponent, a big carrot, so that he couldn't object even if he wanted to. Guzé smiled bitterly and said, "I'm the same as you. I can't control myself." Yi Muyun sighed and said, "Guzé, if Qin Mu still insists on being with Zhou Chengwang, I won't object. Firstly, because of Qin Mu's illness, he wanted her to do whatever she wanted. Secondly, he really saw the change in Zhou Chengwang. It was a good start that he was willing to put in so much effort for a woman. Of course, he still hated Zhou Chengwang. If he had the chance, he still wanted to kill him. Guze paused for a moment, then took a long drag on his cigarette. I just want her to live a good life. Qin isn't an idiot, Yi Muyun said softly. She should have noticed it a long time ago. From the bottom of his heart, Yi Muyun also didn't want Guze to hang on to Qin. He didn't think highly of it, nor did he agree. Guze just smoked hard and didn't say anything. The two men looked at the white skyline in the darkness. After smoking 2 cigarettes, they followed the driver into the car. Those who should be sleeping were all sleeping, and those who couldn't sleep still couldn't sleep. After they sat down, Cher was awake, or rather, she didn't sleep at all. She couldn't sleep beside Yi Muyun. That feeling was like there was a thorn beside her, and there was a sharp pain at any time. She turned her little face to the direction of the window and looked at the boundless night. She thought of what Song Karen said to her shyly before they got out of the car. And Muyun said that he wanted to switch with Guze during the evening party. He'll be sharing a room with me. There was a glint in the corner of Cher's eyes. Since he and Song Karen were in love, why would he do such a considerate thing to her? If it wasn't for Zhao Yan's public image, she would have turned around and left. She especially didn't want to see Song Karen's delicate and timid look. That smile was very glaring. As she thought about it, her hand tightened. She heard Zhao Yan's low laugh. Don't waste such a good seat. Sleep. Snow grunted in acknowledgement, then lay down on her side. Chapter 21:67. Snow grunted in acknowledgement, then lay down on her side. Zhao Yan also turned around and hugged her waist from behind. The two of them were covered with a blanket, just like a normal young couple. Late at night, the staff of the program team suddenly opened their eyes like copper bells. They gently set up the camera and took pictures of the couples sleeping one by one. Zhou Chengwang and Qin Mu's team was quite aesthetically pleasing, but Zhao Yin and Shui Er's team was more romantic. Everything else was still passable. Only Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun, these two men, were glaring at the camera in the dark with unfriendly expressions. These clips will be posted on the official Weibo in real time. Zhao Yin and ANN, once again, became the second most searched topic. The first was Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun because their expressions were There were 74 million likes under that Weibo post. Of the 230,000 comments, half of them were asking for Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun to really be together. Previously, when Mr. Ye's girlfriend, Song Karen, was rumored to have been instantly destroyed, the onlookers didn't seem to think highly of them. Although they were traveling together, they didn't feel like a CP at all. Instead, they felt that Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun were both very good-looking and had a sense of beauty. Also, the scene of them smoking together in the middle of the night was even more beautiful than the international blockbuster of Hu and Hua. Just like that, Yi Muyun and Gu Zhe, these two business elites, were famous beyond reason. The bus arrived at Dali, Yunnan, and they checked into the Shangri-La Hotel. The program team also followed the original plan and arranged a suite for each couple. But when everyone went in, they found that there was only one bed. Gu Zhe, Mr. Yi, you're a high-ranking official. You can sleep on the bed, and I'll sleep on the sofa. Zhao Yin, my dear Cher, why don't you and little uncle sleep together? Song Karen, I don't sleep on the sofa. Lin Shui, 1 million, I'll sleep with you tonight. Qin Mu, Zhou Chengwang, what kind of show is this? Can't you afford 2 beds? Zhou Chengwang was packing his things because Qin Mu was not good at this kind of thing. She was very gentle, but she was really a rich young lady. After coming out, she only cared about lying by the window and looking at the scenery. He was the one who packed the luggage. Hearing her words, he winked and smiled. I've said it before. Unless you want it, I won't force you. Qin Mu made up her mind. You sleep on the sofa. Zhou Chengwang had no objections. But if you sleep next to me, don't say that I'm shameless. Qin Mu snorted and ignored him. There was a deep meaning in his gaze. Qin Mu did not know that she actually had a nocturnal ability. She would sometimes run around at night. She would find the hottest thing and hug it to sleep. They had been married for several years, so he knew this little problem very well. Because she would not leave the room, he did not have the intention to tell her. He paused for a moment. Let me tell you something else. Every night at midnight, The production team will carry the camera into the room to film. Qin Mu exploded. What a pervert! What if someone is doing that kind of thing? His gaze suddenly became deep. Qin Mu, other than us, who else do you think has the possibility of doing this? Qin Mu was even more infuriated, and he threw something over. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and the camera pointed at them. Chapter 2168. Qin Mu struggled desperately. She resisted with all her might and whispered that she didn't want to. However, Zhou Chengwang hugged her tightly and pressed his thin lips against hers again and again. Qin Mu pursed his lips, not letting him have his way. His eyes were wide open as he stared at him. However, Zhou Chengwang's expression was quite intoxicated. He kissed her lips and said in a seductive voice, "Close your eyes. I'm filming." Qin Mu's eyes widened and her voice was muffled. "Zhou Chengwang, I told you that I won't cooperate with your shameless request." With that, she wanted to push him. Zhou Chengwang hugged her forcefully and held her waist. He chuckled and said, "You said that you wouldn't go to bed with me, but you didn't say that you wouldn't kiss me." Qin Mu glared at him and reached out to slap him. Zhou Chengwang raised his hand and gestured for them to turn off the camera. He was the boss behind the scenes, so the staff naturally listened to him. Thus, they quickly turned off the camera and left. When the door closed, Zhou Chengwang's handsome face was immediately slapped. Qin Mu's breathing was slightly chaotic. She raised her head and glared at him. If there's a next time, her little hand was caught. Zhou Chengwang chuckled and said, "You still want to slap me?" He held her little hand and rubbed it gently. Her little hand was particularly soft, and her fingers were slender and smooth. She had never done housework before. Qin Mu struggled, but she couldn't break free. "Mu, if I kiss you again now." He lowered his head and slowly approached her. Qin Mu used her free hand to slap him, but he stopped her in the middle. Both of her hands were gripped by his. "Zhou Chengwang, what do you want to do?" Qin Mu struggled with all her might, but she couldn't break free. She could only stare at him. Zhou Chengwang pressed his lips against hers and whispered, "Qin Mu, I just don't want others to see me forcing you." As he spoke, he chuckled softly. "As for what I want to do," his voice became softer. "I want to make love." As he spoke, he picked her up and threw her onto the pure white bed. Qin Mu struggled to get up, but he immediately turned her over and stuck close to her. "Zhou Chengwang." Qin Mu bit her lip and turned her face away. "Get up." His gaze was dark as he stared at her little face. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, "Kiss me and I'll let you go." She turned and glared at him. "Or I'll kiss you." Zhou Chengwang lowered his head and kissed her lips. His movements were very gentle and forceful as he pried open her. She struggled, so he pinned her firmly and kissed her fiercely. It was as if a gust of wind had passed through. When he let go of her, she was already on the verge of death. Qin Mu lay down and didn't move at all. He didn't want her, but the way he kissed her made her feel ashamed. Zhou Chengwang slowly got up, knelt on both sides of her body, and gazed at her. Her long hair was spread on the side of the pillow, and her black hair was wrapped around the white pillow. Her features were clean. Zhou Chengwang looked at her and felt warm in his heart. He lowered his head and kissed her face, whispering without any emotion, "Mu, let's be together, shall we?" As he spoke, he propped up his body slightly and looked at his little wife. Qin Mu was very young. She married him at the age of 18. She had been Mrs. Zhou for 4 years, but she was only 22 years old now. At her age, many girls hadn't started to fall in love yet, but she had already experienced a lot. Chapter 2169. He couldn't help kissing her again. As he kissed her, he whispered, Mu, I won't bully you in the future. Be good and don't mention the divorce, okay?" Qin Mu let him kiss her because she knew that she couldn't avoid it. If she resisted, he would probably lose his last bit of rationality. Zhou Chengwang kissed her for a long time. Mumuhan. Qin Mu closed her eyes and smiled. "Zhou Chengwang, I'm not a cat or dog, and I won't go with you just because you give me a bone." She opened her eyes. "I know your goal. It's nothing more than to make me Mrs. Zhou, who won't fight or quarrel. And how many days can you be loyal to me?" She chuckled again. "Actually, you're wrong. It's not about whether you're loyal or not, but I don't love you anymore. So, he didn't need to show his loyalty to her. Zhou Chengwang's expression was a little ugly. He kept looking at Qin Mu and said slowly, Qin Mu, I can have you now. Yes, but what about after that? Tie me to the bed? Qin Mu sneered. Zhou Chengwang, don't do such a tasteless thing. I'll look down on you. The veins on his forehead were popping out. They had been together for 8 years, and she had never spoken to him like this. To be honest, he felt very uncomfortable. She used to be such a docile little girl. No matter what he said, she would hold her chin and look at him with admiration in her eyes. Her eyes seemed to be full of little stars. Zhou Chengwang pursed his thin lips and sneered. I only need to have you. Her eyes narrowed, and she stared at him, afraid that he would do something. However, Zhou Chengwang still didn't do anything. After a moment, he left the bed and even the room. In the evening, the sky was full of colorful clouds. The hotel was built by the sea. As soon as they walked out of the hotel, they could see the entire sea. Zhou Chengwang stood there in a white t-shirt and black beach pants. Lin Shui smiled and walked over. She placed her slender arm on Zhou Chengwang's shoulder and whispered, Zhou Zong, why did Mrs. Zhou kick you out? Zhou Chengwang tilted his head and glanced at the seductive woman. He didn't say anything and continued to blow out a smoke ring. Seeing that he did not push her away, Lin Shui felt a glimmer of hope. She hugged Zhou Chengwang from behind and buried her face in his back. Chengwang, I've always liked you. It has nothing to do with your power or money. She lifted her head and tiptoed to kiss his neck. Her voice was particularly seductive. I don't care about our status. I can always be the woman behind your back. But I don't want to. Zhou Chengwang narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice. Lin Shui was stunned. She instinctively wanted to let go, but then she saw Qin Mu sitting opposite her. Zhou Chengwang was also stunned. Qin Mu had already changed her clothes. She was wearing a white floral dress. She probably came out to get some fresh air, not to look for him. But unfortunately, he saw such a scene. Even when he was caught on the spot in the office last time, Zhou Chengwang had not been so flustered. He immediately pushed Lin Shui away and coughed softly. Mumu, it's not what you see. It doesn't matter what it is. Qin Mu looked at Lin Shui and said, if Miss Lin needs it, I can make room for you tonight. Chapter 2170. Zhou Chengwang put the cigarette in his mouth and took a puff. He looked at Qin Mu with a frown. It's windy here. Don't stay here for too long. Did I disturb you? Qin Mu said coldly. Then, she walked toward Zhao Yin and Cher's room. Zhou Chengwang stopped her. Qin Mu. She paused. Remember that you're a married woman. Isn't it inappropriate for you to go to a single man's bedroom like this? He walked slowly to her and pinched her cheek. Or is it because of what happened just now? So, Mrs. Zhou wants an eye for an eye? I'm not as lame as you. Qin Mu pushed his hand away. Zhou Chengwang, don't think that everyone is as shameless as you. After that, she wanted to leave, but he caught her. Zhou Chengwang frowned and stared at her eyes, but he didn't say a word. After a long time, he let go of her and smiled. Remember to come back early. He looked at his watch. It's 6 o'clock now. We'll have dinner at 7 o'clock. Qin Mu broke away from him and ignored his words. Zhou Chengwang watched her leave and smiled. She had really grown up and had a personality. She didn't listen to him anymore. He smoked the cigarette quietly and thought that he probably couldn't let her go. It wasn't because she was the best candidate for Mrs. Zhou, nor was it because he was too lazy to get a divorce. It was because Qin Mu was quite cute when she threw a tantrum. Married life seemed to be much more interesting. After they were about to get a divorce, and Qin Mu went to Zhao Yin and Cher's room just to take a look and talk to Cher. Along the way, her brother didn't seem to take the initiative. They didn't talk. Moreover, Zhou Chengwang, that bastard, arranged Song Karen's room and her brother's room next door. And the celebrity who came with Song Karen was missing. Zhou Chengwang, that bastard. She knocked on the door and entered. It was Cher who opened the door. She was a little surprised to see Qin Mu. Zhao Yin, on the other hand, was adjusting a piano. He was squatting down, revealing only his back. Qin Mu looked at Cher. Can we talk? Cher smiled and looked back at Zhao Yin. I'll go out with Mumu for a while. There are many wolves outside. Be careful. Zhao Yan raised his head and said. Cher paused and then said softly, I'll be back before dinner. Zhao Yan's voice was vague. Don't become someone else's dinner. Cher didn't hear it clearly, and Zhao Yan didn't say anything else. The two girls were walking on the beach when they bumped into Zhou Chongwang. It was the first time in 8 years that the three of them were in the same frame. Qin Mu tilted her head and whispered, We still have to divorce. Cher, think about your brother. I know you did it for me 8 years ago, but he waited for you for so long. Cher was silent for a while and sighed. Mumu, your brother already has Song Karen, and I can't be with him. As she spoke, she smiled bitterly and met the gaze of Yi Muyun, who was not far away. He had been standing alone by the sea for a long time and suddenly saw her. Qin Mu's voice became lower. I only know that you've always been in his heart, and only you. Then she whispered, In recent years, my brother has lost a lot of weight. He always forgets to eat, and he even has stomach problems. Cher's eyes widened. Chapter 2171. After Qin Mu finished speaking, Cher's eyes fell on Yi Muyun. After a long time, she said in a hoarse voice, Song Karen will take care of him from now on. Qin Mu was stunned for a moment, and then she immediately said, Brother and Song Karen haven't reached that step yet. He hasn't brought Song Karen home. She continued, He has waited for 8 years. I don't think he has given up yet. They were so frank, and Cher's heart also became a little gloomy. 8 years was not a pleasant topic to talk about. She didn't hate Qin Mu, not at all. How could she blame a little girl who knew nothing? Besides, no matter how precious love was, it was not as precious as life. She was Yi Muyun's sister. She had been the same as her sister at the beginning. She would not watch her get hurt, even if she was the one who got hurt in the end. She didn't blame anyone. She just wanted to live a peaceful life. She just wanted to be able to calmly say long time no see to her old friends when she set foot on the land of B City one day. Cher remembered the kiss mark on Song Karen's neck that day and smiled bitterly. Mumu, in fact, sometimes people will be lonely. Yi Muyun was the same. He had Song Karen, and it was only natural that something happened between them. Qin Mu frowned. She always felt that she and Cher were not on the same channel. It seemed that no matter what she said, Cher would not be moved. Didn't the book say that the trick of self-injury was the best way to move a woman's heart? Cher must still have feelings for her brother. Why was Cher so determined to go back to the United States, even though she had said so miserably? Qin Mu had no other way for the time being, so she pursed her lips and did not say anything. In the distance, Zhou Chongwang looked at Qin Mu and Cher and watched his little wife saying something. He naturally knew what she was up to. It was nothing more than to make Yi Muyun and Tang Cher reconcile. In fact, he was no longer an obstacle between them. Yi Muyun also knew this. People change. In Zhou Chongwang's world, there was no such thing as pure hatred. He began to live in the secular world, but it didn't mean that he had given up everything. Rather, he had learned to compromise and learn the way that was most beneficial to him. Just like between him and Qin Mu, only when Yi Muyun and Tang Cher reconciled, Qin Mu might let go of her hatred towards him. Yes, she hated him. Although she didn't show it, he could feel it. At this moment, he looked at his little wife's helpless expression and felt that she was very cute. Zhou Chongwang smiled, stepped forward, grabbed Qin Mu's hand, and said to Cher, I'll take Mumu back to the room first. She will have a headache if she stays in the sea breeze for a long time. Qin Mu struggled and looked at Cher for help. Don't you want them to reconcile? Do you think they will have a chance to reconcile if you stand here like a third wheel? Zhou Chongwang chuckled and pulled her away when she was stunned. When Cher was about to leave, Yi Muyun came over and said, What? Don't you want to say a word to me? She stopped and turned to look at him. I'm afraid that Miss Song will misunderstand. She won't. Yi Muyun's voice was very calm. We are brother and sister. His words were almost shameless. Cher glared at him. You can do it, but I can't. Chapter 2172. If this can satisfy your vanity, Cher murmured. Yi Muyun, don't flirt with others when you're with her. You should have seen Zhou Chongwang and Qin Mu as examples. With that said, she raised her eyes and stared at him. After this reality show ends, I will return to America. Yimuyun suddenly said, Zhou Chongwang told me that you'll be participating in the show, so I came. His words surprised her a little. Did he mean that he and Zhou Chongwang had reconciled? Otherwise, why do you think I'd come to participate in such a lousy show? Yimuyun's gaze was deep as he stared into her eyes. Also, don't mention Song Karen in the future. We've broken up. Speaking of this, he was reminded of that night when she had sent Song Karen to his apartment, and he was a little annoyed. And the young lady who had infuriated him was right in front of him. He reached out and grabbed her, and she fell into his arms. Yimuyun, she cried out in surprise. Her small hands became small fists as she punched him. Yimuyun pressed her against him forcefully, letting her do whatever she wanted. After 8 years, his body had become a lot stronger. He was no longer that handsome young man, but a strong man. The sea breeze was very cold, and his body was too hot. Cher was in a world of ice and fire. She punched him continuously and said, You've already broken up with her. Why are you still touching her? Touching her? Yimuyun frowned. Which eye of yours saw which hand of mine touched her? Cher was still fooling around, and he held her hand with one hand. Tang Cher, speak clearly. His handsome face was grim. That night, you were the one who sent her to my apartment. Are you jealous now? HM? Her little hand was caught by him. He held it too tightly. She felt a little pain, but she couldn't break free. I didn't touch her, not even a finger. He emphasized, staring into her eyes. Who told you that I touched her? Cher was a little pretentious. There was nothing between them, and she had no right to comment on his private life. She had to admit that she was jealous and uncomfortable, but she couldn't say it. She didn't say anything. Yimuyun's expression became even more unsightly. She told you? No. She could only say weakly. Yimuyun stared at her sharply, confirming that it was Song Karen who said it. He stared at her for a long time before coldly saying, Idiot! With that, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her angrily. He didn't give her the slightest chance to struggle. He directly locked her arms and held her in his arms as if he was holding a little doll. He kissed her deeply. Her little head kept tilting back, almost breaking in half, and he kept moving forward, holding her little head with one hand, not giving her a chance to move. And just like that, the kiss became even deeper, so much so that it made one's hair stand on end. She finally couldn't take it anymore, shaking her little head and moaning. But he was kissing her so passionately and intoxicated. He had missed her for so long in this kiss. So how could he bear to let go of her? When he finally let go of her, she could barely stand. She collapsed in his arms, panting violently. Yimuyun's fingers stroked her little mouth gently, and his entire heart felt like it was about to jump out. Chapter 2173. Only in front of her would he have such a passionate reaction. He even wanted to pick her up and have her. Then, he carried her horizontally and walked towards his room. Meanwhile, the cameraman of the production team secretly aimed at them. He returned to the hotel room as fast as he could. The door was locked, and she was kissed behind the door. The man who had endured for 8 years could not be rejected. Even when she cried and begged him not to, he did not let her go. From the beginning to the end, Cher did not know how it happened. She only knew that he kissed her, and her head was dizzy. Then, behind the door of the suite, something that should not have happened. After 8 years, that feeling was stronger than before. She did not know whether it was because he was getting older or because he had more experience. Anyway, it was completely different from 8 years ago. She blossomed in his arms and felt that she had finally become a woman. He took her to the storm, and they drifted on a small boat. Unable to find the shore, she could only hold on to him tightly, as if she was holding on to the last piece of driftwood. From 6 to 10 o'clock, he kept pestering her, sweat stained the whole sheet. And when he finally let go of her, they were like two fish. Snow slowly closed her eyes, still lost in the aftertaste of the song. He kissed her forehead and murmured, That night I didn't touch her. I never touched her. He said a lot. Sometimes she was awake, and sometimes she was blurry, but most of them were words of longing. Her body was a little stiff. When the sweat turned cold, she was shocked to realize that they had sex. Her fingers clenched the sheet, and her little mouth became a little pale. She trembled helplessly. Yi Muyun, it's not right for us to do this. He was still kissing her little mouth, and he said in a low voice, I said that I never touched her. Shwe. I promise that everything I've said is the truth. He bit her little mouth. Although I was very angry, I didn't sleep that night and let her stay in the guest room. Cher opened her eyes. What's with the hickey on her neck? Hickey? Yi Muyun frowned. I don't know. Maybe we can ask Song Karen in person. Cher didn't have the face to ask. After a while, she bit her lip and said, let's just treat what happened today as an accident. She wanted to get up, but he hugged her waist. Perhaps it was because Yu had finally been released. His temper was especially good. He kissed her neck and said, be good. I'll carry you to the bathroom. Cher didn't move. After a while, she said in a low voice, I'll still go back to America. Yi Muyun frowned. You responded just now, and you even enjoyed it. Her reaction couldn't lie. She liked that he loved her. When they were doing it just now, she whispered that she missed him. Cher curled up at the head of the bed and wrapped herself in the bedsheet. Her voice was soft. No. She looked at him and said seriously, I'm used to being alone. I'm used to living in America. I can go with you to America, he said without thinking. Schwer looked up at him. He had a serious expression on his face. Let me think about it, she said in a low voice and ran into the bathroom as though she was escaping. Yi Muyun didn't chase after her immediately. He just casually lit a cigarette. Actually, his body wasn't satisfied yet. He still wanted her. Chapter 2174. Guze had been standing guard outside the door for hours. From the moment they entered, Guze couldn't return home. At this moment, he heard Yi Muyun's words and paused for a moment. Mr. Yi, a camera caught you and Cher going back to the room together just now. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes and said calmly, find a room outside tonight. Guze was stunned. How could there be such a thing? But thinking about it, Mr. Yi had probably been holding it in for a long time. Just as Yi Muyun finished speaking, Cher came out of the bathroom, already dressed. I have to go. She wanted to leave, but how could he let her go so easily? He reached out to stop her and said hoarsely, the camera is outside. Do you want to go out now and be caught? Cher glared at him. Sleep first. I'll sleep on the sofa. His tone was calm, but as domineering as before. I'll call you tomorrow morning. Since they had already done it, she wouldn't be bashful anymore. But she still asked, where's Guze? Why? Do you still want to be in a room with two men? He asked coldly in an unfriendly tone. Cher picked up a pillow beside her and threw it at his face. Yi Muyun, you're shameless. He took the pillow away expressionlessly and walked towards the sofa with it in his hand. He turned off the lights. The sudden darkness made Cher a little uncomfortable. She stood in the dark for a long time before she finally moved her body and lay on the bed carefully. But she was still a little afraid, so she didn't dare to fall asleep. In the darkness, she heard his voice. I won't touch you again. He probably felt that his words weren't convincing enough, so he added, I'm exhausted. Even in the darkness, even if he couldn't see, Cher's face was still red and burning. She buried her face in the pillow. There seemed to be a faint male scent on it. It was his scent. That kind of pure, masculine breath made her blush and her heart beat faster. As she buried her face, she felt that her face was getting hotter. How could she fall asleep? After all, they were in the same space, and they used to be so intimate. Not to mention, they just had sex. Cher buried her face and closed her eyes. All she could see was the scene of them hugging each other. She bit her lip and buried her face even deeper. She even felt a little embarrassed. She was no longer a little girl. Just because they had sex once, she was shaken. Tang Cher, have you forgotten that you still have to go back to America? The night deepened. In the dark bedroom, her breathing finally calmed down. But Yi Muyun couldn't sleep the whole night. On the other side, Guze hung up the phone and looked at the moon. Then he saw a beautiful figure by the sea. It was Qin Mu. Why was she sitting on the beach at this hour? Moreover, the sea breeze was strong, and she was still wearing a thin layer of clothing. Guze pursed his lips and walked over slowly. He sat down beside her and copied her action of throwing a pebble into the sea. The sea was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. Guze, you also think that a pebble can't change anything, right? Chinmu's voice was very low. Do you think I'm stupid? For a brother and share, she didn't hesitate to be alone with Zhou Chongwang. But she didn't want to be with Zhou Chongwang on a night like this. She would rather come out to see the sea, even though it was cold. Chapter 2175. Guze's gaze had been on the sea, but he looked away and smiled faintly. No, you're fine. He took off his shirt and put it on her shoulders. Chinmu looked at it and wanted to take it off, but Guze stopped her. After you catch a cold, I think Zhou Chongwang will take care of you. Chinmu glared at him. He really knew how to pick on her sore spot. In the end, she still put on his shirt, looked at the sea quietly, and threw pebbles silently. Guze was only wearing a singlet as he sat next to her. He would look at her side profile from time to time. Her expression was focused, and she would throw a pebble from time to time. Guze thought that Chinmu was actually still a little girl. She had endured things that she shouldn't have, and it was still the same even now. I apologize on behalf of Gume. Guze looked at her sideways and said mildly. Chinmu smiled. There's nothing to apologize for. Zhou Chongwang was never my lover. There's no point in me staying with a man who doesn't love me. She paused for a moment and continued. Even without Gume, there's still Lin Shui and Zhao Shui. He'll never lack women by his side. Guze looked down. But the harm that Gume did to you is real. Harm? Chinmu sighed softly. Probably in the past, but now I really don't care. She looked at the endless dark blue sea and smiled faintly. Guze, I just want to end all of this as soon as possible and start a new life abroad. She stretched and turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were clear and bright, like stars in the night sky. Guze looked at her and couldn't help but feel a little lost. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Can I go abroad to see you? Chinmu broke into a smile. Her smile bloomed in the dark night, as beautiful as a spider lily. She said, Guze, you can't. We are not friends. Guze looked at the sea again. His expression was a little deep. After a long time, he said in a low voice, I don't want to be friends with you. However, he knew that it was impossible for them to progress to the final step. Even if she didn't hate Gume, she wouldn't be able to accept him. Furthermore, she and Zhou Chongwang weren't clear. Chinmu didn't say anything more. There was no need for them to have a deep conversation. Sitting together like this was already their limit. Perhaps they were too lonely, so they sat there until 2 o'clock at night. It was too cold, so he suggested, Let me take you back to your room. Chinmu shook her head. I don't want to go back. Guze didn't want her to be alone with Zhou Chongwang, but he didn't want her to catch a cold. So he got up and pulled her up. I'm looking for a room for you. With that said, he smiled. I'm the same as you, homeless. Chinmu's eyes widened. As you think, Cher and Mr. Yi are together, Guze said vaguely. Chinmu's eyes widened like a little girl's. Guze smiled faintly. I'm going to get a room, too. He gave her a light push on her back. Chinmu was still in a daze, so Guze brought her to the hotel. Guze asked for 2 suites from the receptionist. The receptionist said awkwardly, I'm sorry, Mr. Gu. We only have 1 room left tonight. Chapter 2176. Guze immediately held her slender arm. Chinmu. His voice was a little anxious. Chinmu tilted her head to look at him and said slowly, Mr. Gu, even if I'm going to divorce Zhou Chongwang, I can't possibly stay in the same room with a man who's practically a stranger. She was no longer a 14-year-old girl who could easily fall in love. She thought that based on Guze's looks and temperament, if it wasn't for Zhou Chongwang, the 22-year-old Chinmu might have fallen for him. However, there were no ifs in life. It was impossible. It was impossible. Guze's eyes were as dark as the night. He looked at her quietly for a while before saying, You stay alone. His voice was especially calm and decisive. Chinmu's heart was slightly disturbed, but she still shook her head. Guze, you stay here. I can go back to my room. She knew that he was worried that she would catch a cold, So in order to appease him, she was willing to stay in the same room with Zhou Chengwang. Gu Zhe's fingers tightened slightly, and his gaze became a little unpredictable. Qin Mu knew that he liked her, but it was only now that she realized how passionate his feelings were. She didn't want to be tainted by him, and she didn't want to owe anyone anything. So after staring at him for a long time, she suddenly pushed him away and ran to her room. Gu Zhe clenched his fingers tightly, looking at her disappearing figure in the dark night. How could he not know what she was thinking? Qin Mu just wanted to avoid him. So silly. He took his room card and walked in her direction. He saw Zhou Chengwang open the door and saw Zhou Chengwang pull her in. Gu Zhe stood at the door of their bedroom, almost masochistically. He looked at the door and thought about all the things that had happened behind it. He liked the girl, and before he realized it, he had liked her for a long time. By the time he realized it, it was too late to stop, and he didn't want to, because looking at her from afar, she had become his little happiness. How could he bear to stop? God knew how happy he was when he heard that she and Zhou Chengwang were going to divorce, because he and she had an extra 1 in a million chance. Inside the room, Zhou Chengwang was wearing a white bathrobe, pulling Qin Mu into his arms. Qin Mu struggled. Zhou Chengwang, are you crazy? He didn't make a sound. He just pressed her between the door and his body and stared at her with a judgmental gaze. Qin Mu's back slammed into the door, and it hurt a little. You spent the whole night reflecting and came back at 1 in the morning wearing men's clothes, huh? Zhou Chengwang's expression was very unpleasant. He pressed her down with one hand and peeled off the men's shirts with the other. Qin Mu's body trembled. Only then did she remember that she came back wearing Gu Zhe's clothes. Looking up, she pursed her lips and looked at Zhou Chengwang's handsome but twisted face. Someone lent it to me because I'm cold. Did he have any other thoughts about you, huh? Zhou Chengwang leaned forward, and his large palm had already started to check his territory to see if it had been occupied by other men. Qin Mu almost screamed. She looked at Zhou Chengwang in disbelief, and then she started to struggle violently. Zhou Chengwang, you bastard, let go of me. Zhou Chengwang checked thoroughly and firmly. His handsome face didn't have a trace of softness as he tormented her roughly. I have to ensure that my wife's body and mind belong to me. Chapter 2177. Zhou Chengwang's gaze deepened. He stared at her little face and sneered. Is that so? Legally speaking, you're still my wife. He paused for a moment before he said mercilessly, which means that whatever I want to do to you is legal. Qin Mu's expression changed instantly. She looked at him and almost screamed, Zhou Chengwang, you can't. His voice was firm. You know I can. He pressed down on her, leaned over, and whispered into her ear, Qin Mu, do you think Gu Zhe is outside right now? His fingers pinched her little face shamelessly. If I want you now, will he give up? Qin Mu's body trembled slightly. She looked up at him and said, Zhou Chengwang, you bastard. He pinched her little face and said in a deep voice, wouldn't I be letting you down if I don't do some bastard things? Huh? He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. Swallowing all her resistance, Qin Mu struggled, but he held her wrist firmly and pinned her body to the door. He sealed her little mouth and forcefully took her. Qin Mu's tears fell. She looked at him accusingly with her watery eyes, but she couldn't stop him. Zhou Chengwang was extremely tough. He rarely treated her in such a domineering manner, especially in bed. But now, he was pressing down on her without a care in the world, crushing her broken voice. Outside the door, Gu Zhe was standing and naturally heard the sounds behind the door. Zhou Chengwang probably knew about it and was doing it on purpose for him to see. His fingers slowly clenched. At that moment, he almost wanted to rush in and stop Zhou Chengwang. But what was he, Gu Zhe? He didn't have any standpoint. He was even Zhou Chengwang's brother who was having an affair. If he rushed in, how ironic would that be? Gu Zhe stood there for a very, very long time. He did not know if it was half an hour or an hour. He only knew that the sex in the room had not stopped. Zhou Chengwang was very good at this. As a man, Gu Zhe could feel it through the door. Did Qin Mu endure it for 4 years? When Gu Zhe left, his heart was as wet as water. Instead of returning to his room, He went to the seaside where he and Qin Mu had sat before. He sat there alone, looking at the sea, throwing stones, imagining a little girl sitting next to him. In the suite, after a long time, Zhou Chengwang finally let go of Qin Mu. As soon as he let go of her, her body slowly slid down. So Zhou Chengwang hugged her again and said in a low voice, "Are you sad?" Qin Mu did not want to talk to him. She turned her face to the side, and there were traces of tears on her little face. Zhou Chengwang's heart didn't feel very good. Did she really not like him? However, seeing her helpless look, his heart softened a little. No matter what, he was the one who bullied her. He reached out and carried her back to the bed. He knelt beside her and lifted her long hair, revealing her little face. Naturally, Qin Mu was still angry. She ignored him and turned her little face to the side. However, it was probably because it was really painful. Her tears rolled down again, and they did not stop. "Why are you crying again? Does it hurt?" he asked in a very low voice with a little more tenderness in his heart. Chapter 2178. Qin Mu bit her lip and kicked his shoulder. Zhou Chengwang get lost. However, he grabbed her little foot, and his gaze was very hot. "If you didn't deliberately anger me, would I treat you like this?" Qin Mu opened her teary eyes and glared at him. "Stop making excuses." Compared to her body, she felt more wronged. How could Zhou Chengwang be like this? If he wanted her, he wanted her. He didn't allow her to resist at all. What about their agreement? Qin Mu's lips trembled slightly. "I want to leave the show." Her words were a little childish. Zhou Chengwang laughed and rubbed her little foot. "Mu, be good. I'm not that familiar with you." Qin Mu kicked him again. Unexpectedly, he didn't stop her and allowed her to kick him. He looked like he was very indulgent of her. However, although he indulged her, he still controlled her and didn't let her move. He said in a low and hoarse voice, "You clearly felt it just now." Although they hadn't been getting along very well in the past 4 years, he was still her husband, and they had done a lot of things between husband and wife. Her body's reaction couldn't lie to him. Just now, apart from the pain, she had also enjoyed it. As her husband, he could naturally feel it. Qin Mu's little face was burning, and her whole face was bright. She bit her lip and didn't say a word for a long time. Zhou Chengwang leaned over and kissed her little mouth. He said in a low voice, Mu, let's make up. There won't be anyone else in the future, okay?" When he said those words, he was sincere. When he was hugging her just now, he really felt that he could spend the rest of his life with her alone. At least, he liked her and was willing to make a commitment to her. Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't say a word. He knew that she was unwilling. It didn't matter. If she didn't agree, he could wait. If she didn't agree, he could also wait for a year. But he wouldn't lose any of his rights as a husband. Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly and rolled to the side. "I'll get a towel to wipe you." Just as he was about to leave, Qin Mu's little hand grabbed onto his arm. Zhou Chengwang turned around in surprise. "Qin Mu, there's nothing between me and Gu Zhe." Qin Mu closed her eyes. "Don't take revenge on him." Zhou Chengwang chuckled. "You sound like you're speaking up for him. So, why should I believe you?" Qin Mu suddenly opened her eyes, and her gaze was a little cold. "Zhou Chengwang, if you don't mind, I will make you a cuckold. In the future, after we get divorced, you will be with Gu Mei, and I will be with Gu Zhe. We will still be a family, and this is also fate." At first, Zhou Chengwang was angry, but after a while, he laughed in a low voice. He wanted to get a towel to wipe her body, and his technique was quite outrageous. Qin Mu closed her eyes and didn't want to pay attention to him. When he was done, his breath was also messy. He threw the towel aside and chuckled. Mu, I promise this will never happen again." Qin Mu didn't say anything. In fact, she was just saying it, but she and Zhou Chengwang didn't expect that sometimes what they said would come true. Zhou Chengwang also used up a lot of energy, and he was a little tired. He glanced at Qin Mu and said, "Let's sleep." Qin Mu didn't object to him sleeping next to her. They had done it just now, and it was a little pretentious to let him sleep on the sofa now. Chapter 2179. In the dead of the night, Zhou Chengwang was about to fall asleep. But over the years, he had developed the habit of being vigilant. As long as there was a slight movement, he would wake up. So when Qin got up at night, Zhou Chengwang woke up almost immediately. He opened his eyes and didn't make a sound. He just watched the slender figure in the dark walk to the sofa. He remembered that her bag was there. Under the faint moonlight, he saw Qin open the zipper and take out a white medicine bottle from his bag. He opened it and took out a pill, swallowing it in one gulp. Zhou Chengwang's heart skipped a beat. He knew what she was taking. It was the contraceptive pill. He knew that she didn't want their child, but he still felt bad that she was taking it secretly. She knew that he wanted a child, but she still took the pill secretly. So when they had sex just now, did she think that she was bitten by a dog? Zhou Chengwang's face was very ugly. He restrained himself from getting up and throwing the pill away, because if he did, they would probably be finished. After taking the pill, Qin quietly climbed onto the bed and lay down beside him. He knew that her eyes were open, and he knew that she wasn't asleep. He even knew that she hated and despised him now. His essence, she would also treat it as trash. He was originally very tired, but Zhou Chengwang couldn't sleep now. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her carefully taking the pill. On the other hand, Qin fell asleep after 5 minutes. It was a peaceful night, but the moment the sun rose, the entire social network crashed. Because the reality show Finding One's True Love had a few big news, it was simply explosive. Last night, there were 2 groups of people who were photographed, and they were both considered as having an affair, right? And they were all couples in real life. It was only the first night, and they couldn't wait anymore. The first photo couldn't be denied, and there was even a video. The CEO of Boyi, Yi Muyun, carried the ANN back to his and Guzei's room. What happened after that? I'll omit 10,000 words. The second photo was even more explosive. After all, Yi Muyun was single, and it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was with anyone, even though he and Song Karen were a couple. Qin was different. As Chairman Ye's sister, she was married to Zhou Chengwang a long time ago and was a married woman. But late last night, Qin had been with Guzei the whole time. She was actually wearing Guzei's shirt, sitting together by the sea and hugging Guzei. The tear in Qin I was especially moving in the night. No one could deny that Zhou Chengwang had been cuckolded, and it was on a show he had invested in. The production team's official Weibo account exploded, and the entire Weibo was paralyzed. Zhou Chengwang pulled out the producer, wanting to fire him, but the producer was also very arrogant. He said calmly, "This show is called Finding One's True Love, and only those who can walk to the end of the show together will be counted. Zhou Zong, when you invested, you said that you wouldn't interfere with the progress of the show, and that what we took was the truth." Zhou Chengwang was so angry that he wanted to beat someone up. After a while, he put his hands on his waist and paced back and forth. "Delete the photo immediately." "I can't do that. Now that the photo has been posted, if I delete it, it will undoubtedly prove that Zhou Zong is the grass on top of his head." The producer was not subtle at all. Zhou Chengwang's face turned green. Chapter 2180. Zhou Chengwang looked at the producer quietly. After a long time, he said softly, "Then go and do it now. Put up 2 pictures of me and your wife in love." The producer nodded. "Don't worry, Zhou Zong. This show will not be a mess. There can't be any scandals," Zhou Chengwang said coldly. The producer nodded and went to do it. Zhou Chengwang watched him leave. He lit a cigarette and took a puff. Last night, he forced himself on Qin. After she woke up, she ignored him. He was a little angry, so he pressed her down and did it again. In the end, she cried and cursed him. However, the fiercer she cursed, the more excited he became. They had been married for so long. At this time, he finally got a taste of her. He couldn't bear to let her go. Later, when he went to see the producer, she ran away. After Zhou Chengwang finished smoking a cigarette, the production team happened to gather everyone. Everyone gathered in the hall. When Zhou Chengwang arrived, he saw Qin. She was close to Tang Sher. When she saw him, there was a hint of wariness in her eyes. Zhou Chengwang chuckled. Did she think she would be safe if she stayed close to Tang Sher? How stupid. Later, when they were on their own, she still had to be with him. But what Zhou Chengwang didn't expect was that this time, The production team would let the members form teams voluntarily. Chimu immediately stuck to Shui-er. Shui-er looked at her and felt a little helpless. She could roughly guess what happened between Qin and Zhou Chengwang last night. Qin neck had a big hickey, while Zhou Chengwang's face was full of lust. Cher didn't say anything. It was probably because she had sex with Yi Muyun last night. Guze looked at Yi Muyun and smiled. Then, Zhao Yin said with a smile, "Zhou Zong, let's reluctantly cooperate." Zhou Chengwang looked at his wife with a burning gaze. The producer coughed lightly and said, "Today is the first test. It's very simple. Each team will make their own lunch, and a professional panel of judges will come and taste it to see which team does the best." Cher and Qin looked at each other and silently returned to their original positions, because none of them knew how to cook. Zhou Chengwang gave the producer a look of appreciation. "Well done." The producer raised his hand. "We've arranged for 6 kitchens in front. Guests, please go over and show your skills." Zhou Chengwang looked at Qin. "Do you know how to do it?" Qin snorted. Zhou Chengwang smiled and held her hand, leading the way. As he walked, he said shamelessly, "Don't you know whether I know how to or not?" Qin pursed her lips and didn't say anything. After that, the other teams went over, including Yi Miyun and Guze. Only Tang Cher and Zhao Yin were left. Zhao Yin crossed his arms in front of him and said confidently, "I don't know how to cook." Cher imitated him and snorted coldly. "I don't know how to cook either." One was a young master who only knew how to play the zither, while the other was a young mistress who only knew how to draw. Neither of them gave in to the other. In the face of smoke and smoke, the boat of friendship had capsized. Cher snorted. "I'm here to accompany you. Moreover, you're my little uncle. It's only right that you cook for me." Zhao Yin chuckled. "Sigh, you're a woman and I'm a man. It's only right for a woman to cook." Chapter 2181. Zhao Yin pinched her little nose and harumphed. "I'm your little uncle, so I don't need to serve you." He glanced over and saw the man standing not too far away. Then he smiled. He looked at his niece meaningfully. "Cher, how about this? Guze and Yi Muyun both know how to cook. Why don't you seduce Yi Muyun and I seduce Guze? Let's see if we can get someone to cook for us." Cher glared at him. "Zhao Yin, I'll record this and let your fans hear it." Zhao Yin laughed. "So, that's why you want to seduce Guze?" Shui-er covered her mouth and giggled happily. Zhao Yin looked at her and couldn't help but laugh. Then, his gaze became unfathomable. "You didn't go back to your room to sleep last night. Where did you sleep?" Cher immediately exploded. She had clearly sneaked back at dawn. "How'd he know?" Zhao Yin said in a low voice. "So, you seduce Yi Muyun, hmm?" Cher glared at him. What kind of inhumane program was this? What kind of inhumane little uncle was this? What kind of little uncle would ask his niece to seduce a man like this? She harumphed, and her gaze met Yi Muyun's. His gaze was a little deep. She quickly turned her face away. She felt a burning sensation in her heart. How was she going to seduce him? They even rolled around together at night. Cher pursed her lips and lowered her head. She said in a low voice, "Go ahead." Zhao Yin didn't reply for a long time. She looked up and was stunned. He had already left. It was furious, but Zhao Yin waved his hand at her from afar. She heard an elegant voice. "It's been so many years, and you still don't know how to cook?" Cher twisted her slender fingers and harumphed in acknowledgement. "Idiot." His voice had a strange tinge of emotion. Then he stroked her little head. "Let's go." "Go." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with shock. Yi Muyun smiled, her gaze indifferent. "Go cook." He paused again and chuckled. "Do you want to make love more?" Cher pursed her lips and looked at him absent-mindedly. After a long time, she slowly said, "Where's Karen?" He had already walked to her side, lowered his head slightly, and pressed his thin lips against her ear, saying in a low voice, "Last night when you hugged me and said continue, why didn't you think of her?" Cher was furious. She stretched out her hand to slap him, but he caught it easily. She glared at him. Yi Muyun chuckled. "I've said it before. I've broken up with her, and I haven't touched her." He paused. I'll only say this once. I won't explain it again. She was a little absent-minded and did not come back to her senses for a long time. He took the opportunity to grab her little hand and walk towards the kitchen that she and Zhao Yin had been assigned to. Cher snapped back to reality and said, isn't it a little inappropriate for us to do this? Song Karen? Yi Muyun asked calmly. Cher could not answer him. Yi Muyun smiled. Since when have you become so kind? There is a sense of mockery in his tone. She did not know why, but Cher thought of last night. They had rolled around last night. Honestly speaking, it was a form of mockery for her to mention Song Karen now. So, she did not say a word. He could do whatever he wanted. It would be best if Song Karen hated him out of love and gave him 2 slaps. Although that was what she was thinking, her heart could not help but race. Why had he not touched Song Karen all this while? Actually, she knew the answer in her heart, but she did not dare to think about it. Chapter 2182. Because just thinking about it was sinful. Yi Muyun held her hand and walked towards the kitchen. Just as they were about to reach the kitchen, Song Karen suddenly stood in front of them, blocking their way and looking at them quietly. Song Karen's eyes were watery and her voice trembled slightly. Muyun, is this the reason why you suddenly broke up with me? Yi Muyun stood still. Cher's fingers quietly struggled, but he gripped her hand even tighter. She couldn't break free and could only let him hold her hand. Yi Muyun looked at Song Karen calmly. Yes. Cher was stunned. Could he not be so honest? Although she didn't want to, she didn't explain. After all, she was in no position to explain. Explaining would only make her look hypocritical. Moreover, she had indeed done it with Yi Muyun many times last night. When Song Karen heard what Yi Muyun said, her face turned even paler and her lips trembled. Muyun and Ann are my business partners. I thought you knew about our past. Otherwise, why would you say that we spent the night together? Yi Muyun said mercilessly. Song Karen was a little embarrassed. After a long time, she said in a low voice, That's because I love you. She looked up. I don't believe that I'm not as good as her. At this moment, Cher struggled to break free from Yi Muyun's hand. She took a deep breath and said to Song Karen, Miss Song, we've already broken off our business relationship. In fact, I never signed a contract with you. As for Yi Muyun, I'm more inclined to let things go awry. I don't need him to take responsibility, so I don't want to get involved in your affairs. It has nothing to do with me. With that, she turned around and left. She was no longer the little girl from 8 years ago. She had wronged herself once because of him, but there wouldn't be a second time. She walked away with her back straight. She hadn't wronged anyone. She hadn't initiated it last night, so there was no need for her to feel guilty. Yi Muyun didn't stop her. He only looked at her back for a while before turning to look at Song Karen. Song Karen's body was still trembling, as if he couldn't take such a blow. I think I've been very obvious in the past 2 to 3 years, he said softly as an explanation. I tried hard to fall in love with you, but I didn't. Song Karen leaned forward and said in a sharp voice, But you being with her like this is the greatest harm to me. She burst into tears, and her lips couldn't stop trembling. Just when I thought you finally fell in love with me. She raised her delicate face, trying to stop her tears, but she couldn't. After a long time, she said sternly, I told Ann so excitedly that I was about to get engaged. My boyfriend was so outstanding, and he loved me very much. As Song Karen spoke, his voice became very soft. At the time, do you think she was laughing at me? Because she knows better than anyone who you've always loved in your heart. Yi Muyun remained silent. Song Karen's voice became more and more mocking. When I told her that you broke up with me, she was so happy, wasn't she? Even though she knew that I loved you, she still got together with you. Song Karen sneered. Is the person you love such a hypocritical woman? Are you done? Yi Muyun finally lost his temper. His voice was very cold. If you're done, then get lost. Chapter 2183. His slender fingers played with a lighter as he said softly, One word from me, and you will disappear from the show immediately. Song Karen's face was aghast. I don't believe you. Yes, this show is not a project that I invested in, but it is Zhou Chongwang who invested in it, isn't it? You should be able to tell that he wants to get Chin Mu back now. Do you think my words will work? Yi Mu-yun said coldly. Then, he took out his phone and made a call. Song Karen wanted to slap his phone like crazy, but Yi Mu-yun moved aside and looked at her coldly. Song Karen, you wouldn't joke around with your art gallery and your family, would you? His voice was very cold. If you want to keep everything you have now, then leave immediately. Song Karen's voice was extremely shrill. You bastard. But he was indeed a threat to her, and she had to consider her own situation. Encountering him was undoubtedly not a rational choice. Song Karen still left. She left that day with her luggage, and the production team immediately replaced her with a female, started to increase the popularity of the show. As for Song Karen, she would also be removed from the show and would not appear in a single scene. What was there to see about an abandoned woman? Why not just film Mr. Ye's heroic posture when he was cooking? After sending Song Karen away, Yi Mu-yun walked into the small kitchen that belonged to Cher. The kitchen here was separated by rooms, and each room was about 10 square meters. It wasn't big, and when the two of them stood inside, they were practically sticking to each other's backs, but it gave them a sense of intimacy. Yi Mu-yun walked in with a cigarette between his fingers and saw that Cher was squatting down and peeling potatoes. She didn't do it, so she was naturally clumsy. He did not help her immediately, but chuckled softly at the side. Idiot. She ignored him and was obviously sulking, which made him want to laugh. Yi Mu-yun stared at her, watching as she worked hard, but she only managed to do one part of the work with all her strength. He held a cigarette in one hand and smoked it slowly. He said slowly, "Are you angry?" He paused for a moment, then laughed in a low voice. The one who should be angry is Song Karen. You slept with her boyfriend. You're the one who forced me. Cher looked up at him angrily. And she poked his heart with her little finger. Do you think I will still like a man without principles like you? He was stunned for a moment before he laughed out loud. You've grown up? You dare talk back? Cher pursed her lips into a straight line, and her face darkened. After a long while, she sneered. Yi Mu-yun, every word you say implies the past. She paused for a moment before continuing. Do you think we can still be the same after 8 years? I'm not that innocent little girl anymore. She stood up and looked down at him from above. She slowly said, We ended a long time ago. Let's just pretend that last night was a sunny day. But the moment she stood up, Yi Mu-yun pulled her down again. This time, he quickly threw the cigarette but away and hugged her. Both of them were uncomfortable squatting and hugging, but he couldn't care less. He didn't like the tone she used to speak to him, as if she had really flown away. And in his heart, she had never left. Chapter 2184. He was the first to admit defeat. Even though he hated her, blamed her, and wanted to eat Sundara, his little girl was really amazing. She was really different from before. If he would be like that again, she would really not want him anymore. So, he begged in a low voice, I broke up with her. Come back to me, okay? Cher looked down. Yi Mu-yun, I can't give you anything. Don't start again when it's over. Otherwise, it will only hurt. He hugged her tightly, and his voice was a little bewitching. No, not this time. He hugged her very tightly and used all his strength. She felt as though she was crushed into his bones and blood. It was actually very painful, but she didn't push him away. She was hugged by him quietly and wanted to tell herself that this was the last time. However, he didn't allow her to have such a thought. He lowered his head and kissed her lips. He kissed her forcefully in the narrow space and couldn't stop. He was kissing her so hard that he stumbled. His body was against the cupboard behind him, and she was sitting in his arms. She still couldn't resist his seduction. Her little hands hugged his neck and brought herself to him. This kiss slowly became painful. It was a mixture of all their longing, unwillingness, and anger. When he let go of her, she was shocked to realize that she was crying. The warm tears flowed down his neck and stained his cheeks. Yi Mu-yun reached out and caressed her little face gently. He said in a low voice, Why are you crying? He couldn't bear to treat her like that anymore. He kissed away the tears on her little face. Cher's tears couldn't stop falling. She looked at him with nostalgia and a tinge of pain. Suddenly, she moved closer to his red lips and kissed him on her own accord. He hadn't hugged her for a long time. How could he resist? The kiss was very long, and it almost went off the rails in such an open kitchen. Finally, they were woken up by a sound at the door. It was Zhao Yin at the door. He seemed to look at the two of them in surprise and chuckled. Then, Boss Yi, please continue to cook. Zhao Yin left in a good mood. He probably didn't need to work these days. Just hand it over to Yi Muyun. Cher was still sitting in Yi Muyun's embrace while he was sitting on the ground. It was truly an unbearable sight. She ran her fingers through her hair and stood up. Zhao Yin. He didn't stop and wave his hand again. I'm not interested in being an audience. Also, be careful. The cameras will come and take pictures at any time. If you don't want to be famous, you'd better restrain yourself. As if he had thought of something, Zhao Yin suddenly turned around and grinned. If you really can't take it anymore, you can go back to your room. At most, you could just say it's to practice your lines. That's a pretty good reason. That's what everyone says when something happens in the entertainment industry these days. Cher casually tossed a potato at Zhao Yin, who dodged it with ease, a smile on his face. Cher stared at his back and suddenly had a feeling. She was not the one accompanying Zhao Yin, but Zhao Yin was the one accompanying her. She called out to Zhao Yin, "Little uncle." She rarely called him that. Every time she called him that, it meant it was something serious. Zhao Yin turned his head to look at her and smiled. It's exactly what you're thinking. Cher, you should learn psychology. Also, please don't try to matchmake me. She opened her mouth and didn't say a word for a long time. She could only watch him leave. Still angry? She heard Yi Muyun's voice. Cher took a deep breath and turned around. Yi Muyun, we can only be friends. Chapter 2185. Cher glared at him. He was too shameless. Yi Muyun pursed his lips and reached out to pinch her little face. Call me brother and repeat what you said just now. HM? Cher was still glaring at him, but her mind was filled with the memories of those nights when she was pressed down by him, helplessly and weakly calling him brother. Her little face blushed slightly. Yi Muyun stared at her little face and chuckled. He reached out to stroke her soft cheeks and asked in a low voice, "Are you thinking about the past?" "No," she answered too quickly, making it seem like she was trying to hide something. Yi Muyun chuckled in a low voice. "No, let me check." As she screamed, he covered her little chest and felt her rapidly beating heart. Cher's back was against the counter. She pursed her lips and glared at him. "Yi Muyun, don't do anything rash." He chuckled in a deep voice. "Then I'll do it properly?" HM. He wanted to do something to her again, but Cher slipped past him. Her little face was a little tense as she looked at him. Her heart was heaving up and down violently. "Yi Muyun, what are women to you? No matter how bad Song Karen is, she was still your girlfriend, wasn't she?" Her gaze was a little cold, and he had been listening to her words and looking at her face after a long time. He smiled. The little girl has grown up and changed. Cher was still leaning on the same spot and staring at him. Yi Muyun smiled again. "Cher, being kind to her is being cruel to you. I won't change that." Cher stared into his eyes and didn't say a word. Later, Yi Muyun picked her up and carried her to the counter at the side. She wanted to break free, but he wouldn't let her. He reached out to support her body and said in a low voice, "Sit here and don't move." She tried to move again, but he chuckled. "I'll kiss you if you move again." Cher's body trembled, but she didn't say anything else. Yi Muyun slowly let go of her and smiled. Then he picked up the potato that she had just peeled and peeled it with familiarity. He cut it into thin shreds and added some red chili. Cher was a little surprised. Since when did he know how to do this? "After you left, I moved out. Sometimes I don't want to eat out, so I make some simple food." As if he sensed her thoughts, his voice was very calm. Cher pursed her lips and didn't say anything. After that, she was even more surprised to find that he was not a simple person. He made fish balls. The fish meat was picked up by him, then rolled into a ball. Then he put it in the boiling water for a while, and it turned into small white balls. After looking at it for a long time, she couldn't help but ask, "What kind of dish is this?" Yi Muyun smiled. "Just use baby cabbage, add black fungus, and a spoonful of fish balls." She let out an "oh" sound. Then she watched as he cut a few more vegetables. This time, without waiting for her to speak, he explained mildly, make a for happiness soup. Cher's eyes widened as she looked at him. Is it strange? Yi Muyun smiled a little warmly, completely different from the one she had seen before. After he finished processing the ingredients, and before he put them into the wok to fry, his voice was very calm. I learned it a long time ago. He paused for a moment, and his voice sounded a little distant. I've been waiting for someone to eat my food, but I haven't seen anyone after waiting for a long time. Chapter 2186. Yi Muyun looked at her and chuckled. Shui Bao, you sound a little sour. He didn't explain further because his relationship with Song Karen was over. Cher was right. In this relationship, he was a little immoral and unfair to Song Karen. But love was selfish. He didn't think he was wrong. If he didn't break up now, he would regret it in the future. Cher didn't deny what he said, but she didn't say anything either. He just sat there in a daze, gently shaking his legs. It wasn't until the smell of the wok wafted up that she saw that the shredded potatoes looked good and smelled good. She started to feel hungry as she smelled it. Cher pursed her lips and watched as he took the dishes to the side. He didn't want her to have a taste. She held it in. But when he took the second dish, she couldn't hold it in anymore. The fish balls, baby vegetables, and the wood ear were cooked really fragrant, and the color was really good too, especially the golden leaves of the baby vegetables. She didn't know how he cooked them. In her memory, Sisterly didn't seem to have such good cooking skills. Cher couldn't hold it in anymore and snorted. Aren't we supposed to work together? Yi Muyun was making the last soup. When he heard her, he said calmly, What do you know how to cook? His tone was a little mocking. Cher exploded. I can taste it. His movements came to a complete halt. Then, he looked at her with a faint smile. You know how to taste. Does that mean you know how to eat? Cher blushed. It's taste. Is there any difference from eating? His voice was still calm. Cher snorted. Don't you eat? He tilted his head to look at her and suddenly smiled without saying anything. He held her waist and carried her to the small dining table by the side with one hand. He didn't care how much she ate or whether the production crew would come to film later. He only knew that his long-cherished wish had been fulfilled. She finally ate the dishes he made. Cher took a small bite. It tasted so good that her eyes turned into crescents, especially the fish balls. They tasted really good. She tried her best to eat, puffing up her cheeks and looking really cute. When Yi Muyun finished making the last bowl of soup and brought it over, she saw her like this. After placing the soup on the table, he stood by the side and stared at her. At that moment, she looked like she did 8 years ago. It was as if he was looking at the little Cher of the past. Everything was as it had been in the past. His eyes were a little hot, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. He scooped a bowl of rice for her and placed it in front of her. He then sat beside her and asked softly, Is it good? Cher was quite satisfied with the food she liked. Besides, he wasn't that detestable now, so she nodded vigorously. You don't know, I haven't had many decent Chinese meals when I was in America. After she finished speaking, she regretted it and looked at Yi Muyun. His expression was somewhat unfathomable. After a long time, he said softly, Has it been tough all these years? She was used to being pampered. It was hard for him to imagine what kind of life she led abroad. Her English was so poor. If no one took care of her, she probably wouldn't even have enough to eat. It was no wonder she was so skinny now. Chapter 2187. Cher looked up at him, her eyes watery. So did he. Tom seemed to have stopped. The separation, the hurt, and Song Karen's past existence were all gone. All that was left was the little girl and her brother, the brother who loved her so dearly. The sunlight outside shone through the window and shone on them, forming a faint golden glow. Yi Muyun turned his head and looked at her. After a long time, he smiled lightly and reached out to stroke her long hair. Eat. She still didn't move. His voice became low and hoarse. You're so skinny that you can make a sweet and sour pork ribs. Cher pursed her lips. I don't want to. Yi Muyun looked at her little face and chuckled lightly. Stroking her again, he said, Silly. He had thought of throwing her on the bed and making her into a dish of pork ribs himself. He smiled at the thought of her tender little face. Yi Muyun felt that he was quite a pervert. As he thought of this, he suddenly looked into her eyes. Cher stared at him and spat out a few words. You must be thinking about something perverted. He smiled and didn't say much, only stroking her long hair. Cher pursed her lips. She knew it. She buried her face in her food and decided to ignore him. He didn't force her to talk and just watched her eat quietly. When she finished eating, there was only half of the food left. Yimuyun looked at her in surprise. It was really hard to imagine that her stomach could hold so much food. A small bowl of rice and almost half of the dishes. Cher also felt that her stomach was round and bloated. Looking at his gaze, she felt a little embarrassed. How could she let her guard down against the enemy? She definitely wouldn't eat his food next time. Why aren't you eating? Cher bit her finger and leaned back. Her stomach was really a little bloated. Yimuyun looked at her quietly and then laughed. Concerned about me? Eat if you want. She snorted lightly and was about to stand up and go back to sleep. As for what the production team wanted to film, it had nothing to do with her. She even wanted to go back early. Deep in her heart, she knew that part of the reason why she didn't leave immediately was because of Yimuyun. She had just stood up when he grabbed her hand, preventing her from getting up. His slender fingers clasped hers, and then became 10 fingers interlocked. Let me go, she said angrily. Yimuyun's voice was a little hoarse. Help me scoop rice. Cher glared at him. He laughed. What? You're not going to admit it after eating it? There was a double meaning in his words. Her little face blushed. She couldn't break free from his grip and was extremely annoyed. In the end, she still gave in and said awkwardly, Let go of me, I'll just fill it up. Only then did he let go of her. Looking at her blushing face, he smiled. That's a good girl. I'm not a child anymore. You don't have to coax me like this. I won't fall for it. With that said, she stood up angrily and went to scoop a bowl of rice for him. Then she sat opposite him and watched him eat. He didn't eat much and only tasted everything, but he still finished 2 bowls of rice. Cher pursed her lips. Can I go back to my room now? Yimuyun smiled. It's our room. She was stunned and glared at him. Chapter 2188. Oh, I've already told the production team that you and Zhao Yin are related by blood, while Gu Zhe and I are both straight. So we're in the same group, he said very calmly, his face not red and his heart not beating fast. Cher was dumbfounded. How could there be such a thing? Weren't they supposed to be a couple? How could they change midway? After a long while, she snapped out of it and snorted. Aren't Zhao Yin and Gu Zhe straight? The man who had bullied her since she was young was even calmer now. Just now, Zhao Yin expressed to me that he had feelings for Gu Zhe. Cher was about to vomit blood as she glared at him. I don't believe it. Whether you believe it or not, your things have already been moved to my room. He smiled. Seeing her flustered and exasperated look actually made his mood better. Cher was about to explode. What kind of lousy show was this? This was practically a show where one person could be pimped out. Was it Zhou Chengwang who had invested in it? She stood up angrily. I'm going to look for Zhou Chengwang. Yimuyun smiled nonchalantly. Of course you can, but Cher, if you go now, you might disturb him and Qinmu. Zhou Chengwang and Qinmu? Cher was stunned again. A moment later, she mumbled, You clearly know that Qinmu no longer loves Zhou Chengwang and that she wants a divorce. Why do you still approve of Zhou Chengwang pestering Qinmu? With that said, her expression cleared up. I believe that given your capabilities, it's not impossible for you to help Qinmu go overseas. And you've been indulging Zhou Chengwang all this while. To think that 2 such men would actually work together for their own interests. Yes, it was a collaboration. Cher could already feel it. Yimuyun didn't deny it. His voice was a little hoarse. How could you not know that I sacrificed Qinmu for you this time? Everything she said was right. Cher's face darkened. She recalled how Qinmu had told her resolutely that she wanted to leave Zhou Chengwang. But last night, they slept together again. Was all of this for her? She didn't want to be like this. She wasn't that little girl who couldn't survive without Yimuyun. She didn't want to suffer that kind of heart-wrenching pain again. Cher pursed her lips and said word by word, Yimuyun, I never need anyone's help. I don't need it. He looked at her and said nothing. Yes, I don't need it. Her voice was a little depressed. If Qinmu sacrificed herself, What difference would it make from 8 years ago? Is there any difference between living like that and being dead? She clenched her fists and turned to walk out. His faint voice came from behind. Then why don't you stay with me? Qin Mu had already walked out. If Cher returned to his side, Qin Mu wouldn't have to suffer anymore. Perhaps Qin Mu knew this now, and that was why she did it. She had grasped Cher's weakness. She felt wronged, and this would speed up Cher's return to his side. However, Cher wasn't too bothered. She said that she didn't need it. He watched her walk out quietly. He could deeply feel that she had changed. She had changed. She could live well without him. The fear from 8 years ago struck him again. And this time, was he the only one who had to bear the storm? Had the wound on her heart healed long ago? Yi Muyun stood for 2 minutes and followed her out. Chapter 2189. Cher stood in front of Zhou Chengwang in Qin Mu's small kitchen and was stunned for a moment. Zhou Chengwang was cooking and Qin Mu was sitting at the small dining table, eating fruits. That fruit was supposed to be a platter, but Zhou Chengwang just let Qin Mu eat it? Cher looked at the expression on Qin Mu's face. It was so natural and cheerful, without any intention of forcing it. She was stunned. At this moment, Qin Mu looked up and saw Cher. She put down the fruit in her hand. But soon, she said happily, "Cher, do you want to eat with us?" Cher walked over slowly and sat down next to Qin Mu. Zhou Chengwang did not turn around. He only instructed Qin Mu calmly. "You must think of a way to make up for the fruit you ate." HM? It sounded like he was reprimanding her, but there was a hint of intimacy in his tone. Cher looked at Qin Mu. Had they reconciled? She had thought that with Qin Mu's character, she would not pay much attention to Zhou Chengwang. But Qin Mu replied, "Think of a way yourself." This was a way that only married couples or lovers would do. It was a little coquettish. Snow's heart skipped a beat. Qin Mu stuffed a cherry tomato into Cher's mouth and smiled. "Why are you in a daze?" Cher was speechless for a moment and ate the cherry tomato quietly. Qin Mu glanced at Zhou Chengwang and lowered her head again. But she did not eat any more fruit. Cher pursed her lips and did not say a word. Under such circumstances, anything she said would be useless. Behind her, a shadow blocked the sunlight. She turned her head and saw Yi Muyun standing at the door. His expression was very calm. He walked over indifferently and sat beside her. His slender fingers reached out to touch her lips. "You've just eaten your fill. Why are you eating again? Be careful not to get stuffed." Cher looked at him, then at Qin Mu and Zhou Chengwang. Everything was calm. Time seemed to have stopped. She thought that if Zhou Chengwang hadn't made such a request, and Qin Mu didn't have that kind of illness, it would have been better for them to be together like that. At least, it wouldn't be like this today. "My head is a little dizzy. I want to go back and rest." She spoke in a low voice. Yi Muyun looked at her quietly, his expression gentle. After a long time, he nodded. "I'll accompany you back." Cher didn't say anything and walked to the door. Suddenly, she turned around and looked at Qin Mu. "I just want to ask you something." Qin Mu raised her head. Cher's voice was very slow. "Do you still stand by what you said the other time?" Qin Mu's expression was a little strange. After a long time, she said softly, "Some things will change." Cher didn't say anything more. She was a little dazed. If that was the case, what did her sacrifice back then count for? When she left, she was in a daze. Yi Muyun followed behind her. She turned around and looked at him. Her voice was very soft. "I want to be alone for a while." His brows furrowed. But in the end, he acquiesced. She returned to her room. Now, she was sharing the room with Yi Muyun. She shut him outside and sat alone on the sofa by the window. She watched the tide rise and fall outside, her heart fluttering. The sunlight shone on her body. It was very warm. She thought of many things. When she was young, when she grew up, and the 8 years she spent in America. Yi Muyun stood outside the whole time. His mood was also very complicated. He stood there with a cigarette in his hand. When it was almost noon, Gu Zhe came over. Chapter 2190. Gu Zhe shook his head and looked serious. "I've tried everything, but I can't find anything." Yi Muyun looked into the distance. After a while, he said in a low voice, That's not strange. Uncle Tang must have erased all the traces. Over the years, Tang Yu's attitude towards his relationship with Cher was different from before. Now, Uncle Tang probably didn't approve of it, so he couldn't find anything. This was the tacit understanding between men. There was no need to say it out loud. Guze didn't say anything else. The two men smoked together and looked at the skyline in the distance. And Cher was sitting just a wall away from him. He knew that she was there, but he couldn't see or touch her. Yimiyun pursed his lips and frowned slowly. On the other side, Qin Mu was about to go back to her room when she saw Cher and the others leave. "Where are you going?" Zhou Chengwang's voice was a little hoarse. Qin Mu's voice was cold. "The show is over. I'm going back to my room to rest. You want to throw me away after using me? Huh?" His voice was warm. She didn't know when he had leaned forward and put his thin lips behind her ear, which made Qin Mu's heart throb. "Zhou Chengwang, what do you want to do?" Qin Mu was a little annoyed. She turned around and glared at him. He pressed his hands on her shoulders and looked at her with a burning gaze. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Qin Mu, regardless of whether what you said to Tang Shuo is true or not, I hope it's true." Her expression changed. He continued, "Isn't it good for us to be like this?" With that, he frowned. "I can do it without anyone else." Qin Mu gently broke away from his hand and looked at him. She smiled. "Zhou Chengwang, do you believe what you said?" Zhou Chengwang pursed his lips. "I want you to believe me." "I don't believe it." Qin Mu's reaction was a little intense. "I don't believe a word of it. I don't want to wait for you at home anymore. I don't want to be filled with anticipation or guess if you really like me anymore." Zhou Chengwang's heart skipped a beat, and he looked at her deeply. Qin Mu probably felt that she was too emotional. She took a step back and softened her tone. "Zhou Chengwang, I don't want to be like this anymore. Do you know how I felt when I heard what Gumei said one day?" She calmly said, "That night, after we did it, you fell asleep beside me. At that time, I wanted to stab you to death with a knife." Zhou Chengwang's eyebrows twitched. "You destroyed not only my dream, but also Cher and my brother's happiness." Qin Mu smiled and cried, "If they are not happy, can I still love you?" However, she immediately denied it and smiled sadly. "No, Zhou Chengwang, I don't know how to love you anymore. Those women are not the most important, but our marriage has always been a lie. There's no love at all. He had never loved her at all, so she had no reason to forgive him." Zhou Chengwang listened carefully after she said so much. When he looked up again, he saw that her face was full of tears. "Mumu," he said in a low voice, calling her name. "Don't call me Zhou Chengwang like that." Qin Mu gently covered her face. "Really, don't call me like that. Tell me, do you love me now? Or are you just pestering me because you don't want a divorce?" Zhou Chengwang couldn't answer such a question at once. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.